Hello dear friends, I'm August, this is Cozy Rosy Reads, and today we're going to be chatting about all the books that I read in the month of January. We are now a month into 2022, and I hope it's going well so far. I read 7 books in January, and I pretty much enjoyed all of them in some way. Some of them were not my all-time favorites, but I still had a really enjoyable reading month and experience, and I kind of have been figuring out a little bit more of what do I personally like in books and literature, and that's always just such a treat, you know? So I hope you all are doing really well. I wanted this video to be a little bit more chatty than my last one when I was sick, my November and December wrap up. What a train wreck that was. So I want to talk a little bit more about plot, but I still want to kind of go back to what I did in November and December wrap up of comparing certain books with other books, and then also how it made me feel, using some adjectives, using some situations, similes, metaphors, analogies, all of those fun things. So that's what we're going to do today. I hope you can cozy up and let's just chat about some books. Feeling a little laid back today, feeling a little cozy. It's a really sunny February morning. I got my coffee. I'm just feeling relaxed and really at ease. So this will be a little bit more of a calm video. So I kicked off the year 2022 with a psychological thriller, and that was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This is a multiple perspective psychological thriller with a bunch of different timelines. It bounces between when our main character Jessica is in present day, she gets an invitation to her university's reunion party, and it's her time to shine, okay? She's gotten her life together, she's so successful, she's looking great, she's feeling really good about it. And you already get a sense that she's trying to prove herself in this group. So when she was in university, she was in a friend group with 6 people. They had a name for themselves, and I'm really blanking on what it was, the East 6 or something. It was a hodgepodge mix of people, and they all became friends, and then something happens. One of their friends is murdered, and one person in their group is framed for that murder, is arrested, then is released. And since then, this whole group has just been broken up. You already get the sense that Jessica is, like I said, she's trying to prove something. She wants to go back to this university and this reunion party to just show how much better she is than everyone else. She's always has this sense of she's the best. She wants to be recognized for how much she's done and how much she's grown and how kick-ass and successful boss babe energy she is. And the tension in this book is so palpable. You could cut it with a knife. It is so engrossing. It just pulled me in by page 1 of this woman's life. So it starts off with her perspective, and then it bounces back into her university days when she first met all of these people and what she was feeling and what her life was like at that time. And then throughout the book, we get chapters from kind of everyone else's perspective, but it is written from a third-person view. So it's really interesting. You get all of these characters. And one of the things that's just so amazing about this book, and this author in particular, is that there are so many characters, but they all felt so individual and distinct. They never really got confused in my mind at all. And that's just really impressive. Sometimes I feel like I have to create an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of characters and their personalities and their characteristics and their personal relationships with everyone else in the group. But for this one, it was just, they were so distinct and they stood on their own, and it was very gripping. The psychological thriller, there are red herrings absolutely everywhere. So when they arrive at this reunion, the victim, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name, Heather. Heather is the one who was murdered in their friend group. Heather's brother is at the reunion, and he kind of traps everybody and says, I know one of you killed my sister, and I'm gonna figure it out, and I know it's one of you. So they all start kind of turning their backs on each other, unraveling these secrets they've been hiding from each other for all these years. It's their 10-year reunion. Just so fascinating. So there are red herrings everywhere. It just keeps you so engrossed because the chapters are so short, and there's so many bouncing timelines and perspectives. This is just one of the most fun thrillers I've ever read, and even when things felt like they were wrapping up, you get another twist, right at the very end, and I'm like, what? This one lingered with me. After I finished it, I think I just kind of sat in silence for a little bit and was just what happened? So I really enjoyed this thriller. I think in my brain it's a 3-star because I don't feel like it's super memorable, but in talking about it, I can gush and I can talk about how much I enjoyed it. but I don't think about this book, you know? I feel like for me, a 4 or 5 star is a book that I think about pretty periodically. Like, I just think about it, I reference it in my brain, I think about how enjoyable it was to read. This was enjoyable, but it just hasn't really stuck with me. So for that reason, it is like a 3 or 4 star. Reading this book felt like lonely, dark winter nights where you're sitting at home and you're lonely and you're bored, but it's so dark and cold outside that you're like, I just don't feel like reaching out to anybody right now. I don't want to necessarily leave my house, but also I'm really lonely. So like that, what do I do feeling? And it also just felt so reminiscent on university and finding your people and what that feels like when you feel like almost like a light bulb moment of, aha, these are my people. This is my group. This is where I belong. This is what friendship is. It was just really well-rounded, really well done. I don't feel like I read a whole lot of thrillers, so I'm having a hard time placing like what I would compare this book to. I feel like the thrillers I read, I just forget about them almost instantly. So I guess I would compare this to, oh gosh, what is it? Black Chalk. I listened to that as an audiobook maybe like 3 years ago, so I have a vague memory of it, but it is like university days. It's about very competitive friends. So I would compare it maybe to Black Chalk. So that is In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. Next, I read Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood by Marjane Satrapi. This is a beautiful graphic novel, and it is the first of, is it a duology, I believe? So I found this while thrifting. I had seen the movie adaptation of this, which is kind of animated in this graphic novel format, when I was in like middle or high school, so I was pretty familiar with the plot and the character. But it is this memoir in graphic novel form of Marjane, who is growing up in Tehran between the ages of like 6 and 14 years old, and how much the political climate at that time shaped her childhood and her family life and her beliefs. It was just so eye-opening for me because I honestly did feel so stupid while reading this. I felt really uneducated. I felt incredibly unworldly. I felt like there were just so many references in here where I was like, okay, this is like vaguely familiar to me, such as like historical figures, political leaders, major world events. Like they sound familiar, but I feel like I know nothing. And I feel like maybe my public education dropped the ball hard on informing me of the events going on in the world around, because I just did not understand most of this book. It is so infused and entwined with political movements, historical events, and what it was like to grow up in this political turmoil and this big time of revolution and change. It was heartbreaking. It was eye-opening. I just feel like I was so close to learning something, but I feel like I really have to do my homework if I do want to learn from this, if that makes sense. Looking up all of these different references in here, understanding culture and significance a little bit more. So it was a little difficult for me to read just because I did not quite understand everything that was referenced in here, and that always makes me feel a little inept. It was just completely eye-opening though. She grew up with parents who were very revolutionary. They would attend all these protests, so she'd worry about her parents' safety all the time. She always wanted to join them, but it was not safe enough. She would fight and rebel in her own ways by wearing jeans, by having like rock and roll posters in her room. It was just so fascinating to read all of this from an adolescent perspective. So I really enjoyed it. I would definitely compare this just from like the density of the topics being covered, but in a graphic novel form. Of course, I have to compare it to Mouse, which is an incredible graphic novel about World War II and the Holocaust. So definitely reminded me of that, of like the dense topics, but done in this graphic novel, kind of almost like accessible format. I just thought it was really fascinating and interesting. Reading this to me felt kind of like cutting into a piece of fruit with like a really, really sharp knife. You know, it's this dainty motion, it's this like delicate, romantic cutting up fruit. It's very intentional, but that sharp, pointy knife is dangerous and you should be wary and cautious. Kind of felt like the dualities of this book. Some of it felt so childish and sweet, but so complicated and dangerous at the same time. So that is Persepolis. So since this is a memoir, I don't give memoirs ratings, not my personal thing, but I did enjoy this. I will definitely be on the lookout for the other book when I am out thrifting. So that is Persepolis. I should say too that this book is translated. I forgot to mention that. So the translation of the first part is by Mateus Ripa, and the translation of second part is Blake Ferris. Uh-oh. I might have to pause the video because someone's car alarm's going off. Well, BRB. There's two going off at the same time. Oh, come on, people. Find your car and fix it. Okay, we are back. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. That lasted a long time. But up next, I read Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko, which is translated from Russian by Julia Matov-Hersey. I did a whole reading vlog about this book, so I've talked about it a lot, but I'm gonna try to condense all of my thoughts for this wrap-up. This follows a young girl named Sasha when she's a young teenager. She's approached by this man while she's on vacation to do these very ridiculous, intimate, freaky tasks. I think freaky is the only word to describe it. And she is then rewarded in some way, and it's very bizarre. And she is given admittance into this university, the Special Technological Institute, where there are kids like her who have no idea why they're there. They were approached by a random person to do very weird things, and they have to study. They have to study things that are bigger than just education. It is all about like forming the mind and almost like retraining the brain to view the world in a different way. I picked this book up when I had COVID and I was feeling really sick. I was like, yeah, I'll just read like a fun, fast-paced, bizarre book. No, this is a lot of big brain energy. You will fall down a rabbit hole completely. You will get lost in it. It will feel like you have static in your brain or bees hiving around in it. Those might just be like my comparisons right there. Like it feels like TV static or radio static in your brain, just all this white noise. It is so bizarre. It does dip into like this very surreal, magical realism elements. But you just can never put your finger on anything. The perspective we read of Sasha is as she transforms her brain. So while it's in third person perspective writing style, we can see the clear changes that are starting to happen in Sasha during her time at this university. So I believe there is a sequel to this book, it just hasn't been translated in English. So fun fact is that Julia Matov-Hersey, the translator, originally began her translation of Vita Nostra because she wanted her family to share her love for this striking example of urban psychological science fiction and fantasy with its literary allusions and ominous atmosphere. So hopefully Julia Matov-Hersey can translate the sequel, because I do believe there is a sequel to this. This is just so bizarre, so weird. The writing style just, it flows so weirdly. The translation is really beautiful. It is so perfectly done, and it's just very bizarre to see the changes in our main character Sasha and the way the writing style changes with her. So if you're interested in a little bit more in-depth talk about the plot and even some spoilers, if you're interested, I do have a whole reading vlog, so I will link that down below where I talk about it a little bit more. This was just such big brain energy. It was not what I was anticipating going into this book, but I really enjoyed it. I think this one stuck with me. It's just so bizarre. It made me feel really weird after finishing it. Like I just kind of felt like I was so in this world. So it felt really bizarre to just be like back in reality. So it is very long. It's a very laborious book, I feel like. It's pretty chunky and it just covers so many different years of Sasha's life and the different evolutions she makes in it personally with her mindset shift and learning these things about the world and visualization and the difference between body and mind and how everything is energy and everything is not what it appears. It was just so interesting, but then also to see these human characteristics in Sasha at the same time, where she's frustrated, she's angry, she's like an overachiever perfectionist when it comes to education, and she struggles with these authoritarian figures in her life, like her teachers and educators and supervisors, and how much they manipulate her and how she feels manipulated, and everyone else in the school just has no idea why they're there, and it's just so interesting. And the relationship she has with these students is very interesting too. So this book really did just feel like falling down into a rabbit hole and then having your brain filled with static noise, and it was just very disassociating. And I don't know, it just felt so bizarre. It kind of felt like an empty void. Like you never knew was in your brain or in the world around you, but you fell into it. It's just like a completely white void. It was very bizarre, and I really liked it for that. I think it was one of the most like unique kind of books and storytelling that I've read in a while, and it was just very interesting. So I would definitely compare this book, because somebody, I think on Goodreads or maybe even blurbed on the back of this book, it's like Kafka meets Harry Potter, but I really disagree with that. I think this is much more like Catherine House, as well as The Job of the Wasp by Colin Winnett, where there are these unpredictable characters, you don't know who to believe, you just don't trust anybody, you don't understand what's happening. The perspective you get, it's like you can see people doing certain things, you can see them going about their day and doing tasks, but you just don't understand the motive ever, and you don't understand the bigger, broader picture. It's almost like you're zoomed in too much, so you just don't understand the lessons they're being taught. You're just not given anything in this book. So I think it's like a 3.75, 4-star. Again, I've just been really picky about like what 5 stars mean to me this year, and I think 5 stars are just books that will linger with me for a really long time and that I think about really periodically. So sometimes my ratings will have to just be reevaluated. After I've read them for a long time, it's been a few months, like have they still lingered with me? Which is why if you follow me on Goodreads or Storygraph, which is very new to me, I'm now on Storygraph, so I'll add that link down below too, but I just don't rate books right when I finish them anymore, unless I know for sure it's like a 5-star. So yeah, for me, this is like a 4-star book. I really enjoyed it. I think it is super bizarre. Don't go into it thinking it is like Harry Potter Dark Academia. It's just not at all. It is so much more than that. It's very big brain energy, and I really liked it. It was a very unique reading experience, especially when you're sick and have brain fog from COVID, and you're just like, what is happening in reality anyway? Might as well read this. So that's a Vita Nostra. Next, to alleviate my brain, I read Cheese Sweet Home by Konami Kanata, and this is translated by Ed Chavez, translated from Japanese. And this was perfect. I read it in like half an hour. It is so cute. It's a little manga graphic novel, and it's full color, which is darling. So it's just this tiny little book about this little cat, and he is separated from his mama cat and gets lost, and this little family with a little boy find him and bring him in. The only problem though is that this family lives in an apartment and they are not allowed to have pets in the apartment. So they're trying to find a family that will take this cat in, kind of unsuccessful. And the whole time Chi is trying to escape. He wants to find his mama so bad, and it's just like really heartbreaking. But then over time he starts to fall into this routine with his family, and he starts to get cozy in bed and understand how to use a litter box. And it's all these just really tiny vignettes almost of Chi learning and exploring his new apartment home with this family, and it's just really endearing and sweet. I have the second volume. I would love to read the rest if I can find them. So I really enjoyed this. It was a nice reprieve from something as dense and confusing as Vita Nostra. This is definitely like a middle grade kids book. There's hardly any dialogue whatsoever because it just follows this little cat. It was just adorable. It was really sweet. It was really wholesome. And I say read more stuff like this if it's gonna make you feel better. After reading a dense book, or if you're having a bad day, like just read about a cute little kitten and cute little Japanese apartment and a little family and found family. It was just really sweet. So Cheese Sweet Home. Now we're dipping into the last 3 books that I read in January, and they are all classics, and I'm really proud of myself. So I'm going to take a little moment here just to talk about classics and how I feel about them. So before I started BookTube, I could not really give 2 shits about classics. I was like, yeah, they exist. They felt like required reading in high school, and I understood the value of them, but I really didn't like reading classics when I was in middle and high school. I loved English class. That was my favorite. I loved reading so much, but there were just certain books in my like required English education that I just like was like, oh my gosh, why is this important? I'm so frustrated. I don't like the writing style. It's just so like white man. Ugh. Like I just didn't like it, so I kind of avoided reading classics for a long time. And then when I joined BookTube, I kind of felt like, a little pressured to read more classics. Like, that shows off an intellectual level, shows off that you understand literature in a historical context, as well as just that like very flourishy, beautiful purple prose writing style. So I just started picking up a bunch of classics and then just never reading them when I first started BookTube. Now I'm at a point where I'm really enjoying classics, like genuinely enjoying them, and they feel way less daunting to me, which I'm just really proud of for myself. So I just want to give myself some gratitude and hopefully give you all, if you are interested in classics but find them really daunting or intimidating, start one. If you don't like it, put it down. Like, you're not gonna get in trouble if you just like end up not reading them. It's okay to not read them. It's okay to not enjoy them. And I think for me right now, I'm still dabbling. I'm still trying to figure out what era do I like reading from, what perspectives do I like reading from. And I know I really need to diversify my classic literature. Right now it is just very white, and I would like to change that as well. So let's go ahead and get started into the last 3 books that I read in January. First off, I read Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Why do I struggle with that so much? I think I just feel really stupid when I say it, like Waugh. And I've also heard it's Evelyn, also pronounced as Evelyn Waugh. So I'm not sure. I'm so sorry. So Brideshead Revisited was written in the 1940s, and it follows a young man named Charles as he's entering into Oxford. It actually begins with him a little bit older while he's in the army, and he revisits this place called Brideshead, this giant house, this mansion, this estate that has now been given to the army, that are now set up as like army barracks. So he revisits it and goes, oh my gosh, I know what this place is. And then we are thrown back into his past perspective of showing up at Oxford and meeting very quirky, very like aristocratic, pompous, beautiful people. And one of them is his friend named Sebastian. And kind of right off the bat, Charles is talking about how beautiful Sebastian is as a person. He's handsome, he's gorgeous, he's unique, he's a little quirky, and comes from a very wealthy family. And it follows them interacting with all these other characters on the Oxford campus. It is so beautifully written. They go on all these adventures and romps, and it's just so delicious because it is like this languid adolescence, and it's just so beautiful. Like, it feels very full of fanfare and oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of something right now. It's like 1920s kind of elite artistic students who would all dress up really nicely and then go on picnics and do bizarre things, kind of like the Life and Death Brigade and Gilmore Girls at Yale. I'm really blanking on the name. I'll look into it, and Editing August can probably figure that out. So hey friends, oh my gosh, Editing August here. So I was Googling what I was blanking so drastically on. It's the Bright Young Things, which was this bohemian group of aristocrats and socialites, like very young people, white, in the 1920s in the UK, who dressed up really extravagantly, really beautifully. It was kind of like almost like an art performance, but very aristocratic, very socialite. And they would dress up super fancifully and then go out and play cricket or go on these picnics. But then Cecil Beaton actually did this gorgeous series of photographs, so definitely recommend checking it out. But what was most interesting, if you hear my laptop in the background, it is so loud right now. It sounds like it's trying to blast off into outer space because I have so many programs running right now. But this article by The Guardian, in describing Cecil Beaton's collections of photography about the young bright things, it reads, in his novel Vile Bodies, published in 1930, Evelyn Waugh gleefully satirized the gilded lifestyles of the so-called bright young things, whose antics were then regularly attracting the attention of gossip and society columnists in an otherwise colorless post-war Britain. So happy I looked this up because Evelyn Waugh literally referenced and was like satirizing bright young things, but it definitely feels like in Brideshead Revisited, there is an air of that aristocracy, of that elite socialite vibe, very bohemian, very art performance, over the top luxury, and the way that they speak is just so beautiful and eloquent and really over the top. So happy I looked this up before this video went up. So yeah, if you all are interested, definitely recommend looking into Bright Young Things and researching it a little bit more, because it's just such a fascinating like movement slash performance slash lifestyle. I don't even know, But yeah, just had to throw that in there. So back to the video. But it's just very pompous. And then as Charles grows up, the writing style changes, things become much more serious, relationships become much more complicated and confusing and dynamic, and Charles ends up getting just so enveloped in Sebastian's life and his family. Sebastian's family is all about Catholicism and wealth and image and aesthetics, and it's just very interesting, whereas Charles is a very proud agnostic. So it talks a lot about religion in here, but then also there is just this very strong sexual tension between Charles and Sebastian. You can tell there is a love there. There's a romance, but it's just not outwardly talked about, but you can see it and you can read it in between the lines. And it was just so beautiful and heartbreaking. And then as their lives just continue, it's so much more strict and boxy, and the writing style becomes really constricted and very almost stale in comparison to that beautiful, flowery, languid childhood and teenagehood of just spending time together and drinking wine and rolling around this giant estate. So it was beautiful to read, though. This writing style was impeccable. I was annotating so much of this book. There were so many beautiful lines and paragraphs, and it was honestly a joy to read. I really enjoyed this writing style. I would love to read more books like this, especially as I'm getting into more classic literature. So Brideshead Revisited was just so beautiful to me. I would say that reading this book it felt like a dream. The early adolescent part where they're at Oxford and finding this friendship, it just felt like this foggy, hazy, beautiful, romantic, it just felt like what you feel when you look back on your teenage years or childhood. And it does feel really rosy, like rose-colored glasses. It just all feels so warm and special, and every little detail and touch, and it's just electric, and it was just really beautiful. And I would compare reading this book, I just don't feel like I've read anything similar because I am so new in classics. So I know I compare a lot of books to this one, but I would kind of compare it to The Rose Variations by Marisha Chamberlain, because it does follow somebody's almost entire life in such minute detail. And it's just so beautiful, and I really love those descriptions. Yeah, I can't quite think about another book that I would compare this to. Well, I guess I would kind of compare the writing style a little bit to The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, because it is just so a lot of descriptions of nature and surroundings around, but then when it's talking about what people actually did, it's very blunt and to the point and really easy to follow. But at the same time, there are these flowery descriptions, and then in between these two different things, flowery descriptions and very concise to the point actions and dialogue, there is all of a sudden 2 to 6 lines of things about life in general that are just so poignant. It can be applicable to anybody's life. It's a little bit bigger than the story itself, bigger than life itself, about love, death, mortality, morality, religion, bigger topics. And I feel that was kind of interspersed throughout The Secret Garden as well. So that's a writing style that I really enjoy and I like. Those are typically the passages that I underline the most, is when all of a sudden it kind of takes us out of to an aerial view from the characters in the story to talk about a bigger concept. So I really enjoyed this one. This is definitely a 4-star for me. So I really enjoyed Brideshead Revisited, and I really can't wait to watch all the film adaptations now. Next, I read The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Thankfully, one of my subscribers let me know that I indeed did not read this when I was younger. I read another short story by Jack London instead. So I was very confused going into this. I thought I knew the plot. I thought I knew where it was going to end. And then I was completely thrown off my guard and was this is definitely not what I read. So The Call of the Wild is written from a third-person perspective again, but it does follow the vantage point of a dog named Buck, who was stolen from his owner's home, where he was living this the most luxurious, glorious dog life ever, going hunting with his owner, relaxing in front of a fireplace, just living the dream, and then all of a sudden is sold and is beaten, and boy do things get gruesome. I definitely would not recommend this book. I can't believe it's kind of considered a children's classic, because it is so gruesome. It's dogs killing each other. It's dogs just attacking. It's bloody. It talks a lot about bones and teeth and claws and ripping flesh down to the bone. Yeah, dogs fighting to death. And it was just very gruesome, a lot of animal cruelty. And then the very ending, I just did not like what this book was kind of insinuating. So I don't want to spoil it necessarily, but I think that it is incredibly outdated and we should be promoting other classic literature to younger readers. This just kind of puts a very biased history specifically between white invaders to indigenous people. This should be clarified a little bit more with like the fact that indigenous people and native people have a right to do certain things to people who are literally invading their land. And then, I don't know, I was just not fully satisfied with that ending. But up until then, I was annotating a lot. I think there was a lot of beautiful writing. I really loved that we were following solely the perspective of the dog. I thought that was really interesting. I think that you were able to view certain characters really well from the vantage point of a dog. If he was being treated well, if he was overworked, if he was beaten, all these things, it was just really interesting. So I did find it interesting, but now that I've actually read it, I think I can form my own opinion on it and just say that this one is like, happy I read it, but I think that we should be promoting other literature, especially to younger readers. So I would compare reading this book though to, it just felt so naturey, like out in the wilderness, out in the cold and the snow by a campfire. So that equal feeling of like your fingers are frozen, but it still feels a little exhilarating, and then you go back inside and everything's like really tingly. I would also compare it to that adrenaline rush you get when all of a sudden you're in nature and you feel that really strong sudden urge to go and run. Maybe you're with like friends or family and you're out in the middle of like a forest or a field and you're like, oh my god, like I need to run right now. I need a frolic. I need to just like speed, just run right now. Anyone else get that feeling? Because I do very strongly. I'm like, oh, I just need to run in this right now and feel that. So that's how the book made me feel. Guess I would compare this book in itself to, I don't know, because it is like targeted for like a younger age originally, but I'm just really not sure what other piece of literature I would compare it to. I don't know, friends. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on this one. So that's The Call of the Wild. And the last book that I read in the month of January was Candide by Voltaire. This one took me by such surprise. I never really felt daunted reading this. I just kind of went in and was immediately swept away. It is funny, it is ridiculous, and it is not for everyone because there are trigger warnings out the wazoo, friends. It is all about pillaging, murder, sexual assault, rape, just bad times all around. It was published in 1759 and was it translated? I'm sure this was translated, but I'm just not sure who actually translated it. The introduction is by Anne Rooney, but I'm just not... I might not be able to find that information right now. So Candide follows this young man named Candide who's living on this estate. He has a romantic encounter with a woman named Cunegonde, and he is kicked out of the castle right away. Like chapter 1, he's just like punted right out of there. But this book is just so satirical. It's so whimsical and funny. Candide has a very strong admiration for they have a really long name for this guy. Let me see if I can find it real quick. A man named Pangloss, who was professor of metaphysico-theologico-cosmology. It is so tongue-in-cheek, it is so raunchy and ridiculous, but basically it follows Candide trying to find his love, Cunegonde, while being completely stripped of all of his wealth, all of his titles, thrown into a world of war and crime and filth and real life and just all these tragedies. But throughout it, he tries to have this optimistic perspective because Pangloss taught him as this like philosophy that everything works out for the best, everything happens for a reason, just stay optimistic. So Candide, while he's like in jail, while he's being tortured, while he's in the army, going through all of these ridiculous things, he's like, this is for the best though, like it's okay, everything's fine. It's just so cheekily optimistic, and I had so much fun reading this. I just wanted to sit down and read it. I continuously was just like drawn to it. I wanted all my spare time to be reading this. For a book that was written this long ago, I can't believe I enjoyed it this much. Like this really turned my brain on to like really just cheeky, funny, satirical classics. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everyone though, because it's very brutal, but it's also very whimsical and funny at the same time. The amount of times I was just laughing out loud and I annotated LOL in this book is just too many. So I really loved Candide. It really surprised me. I loved it so much. There were also in this book just so many one-liners of very poignant descriptions that are still applicable to our modern day society about grief and vanity, and it's just so interesting. So I really love this. I would compare reading this book to just watching a comedy, honestly. Like, it was just like this tragedy comedy, and it was so funny. And I would say literary wise, I would kind of compare this to Orlando by Virginia Woolf, where it is so slyly tongue-in-cheek satirical sometimes that it's hard not to take it seriously because of how long ago it was written and how important it is in historical and literary context. Like, Orlando is supposed to be funny, and I never went into Orlando thinking it was kind of supposed to be funny and confusing on purpose. I just thought everyone in that time period was like trying to write the next best masterpiece and everyone was so serious, but in reality, it's not. Like, people were just making fun of each other and making fun of their world and their society and their different classes and the things that happen and how ridiculous it all is. So even back then, like, people were questioning their reality and their government and their leaders, and it's just really interesting. So I would also compare this to some short stories by Dostoevsky, where it is a really big critical piece on society as a whole and leadership, where it's just very critical. Like, this book is so critical of the time period. Voltaire even name drops his enemies in here, which is just hilarious. Like, it's just really good. So this was my 5-star read of January. I loved it. I've thought about it so much since. I would love to reread it. It was so easy to read too. It just felt so accessible, and I just had a lot of fun with this one. So that is Candide. So there we have it, friends. That is my beautiful stack for January. I would love to hear what you read in January, if you've read any of these, what your favorite books of the month were. I hope you enjoyed coming along with me and talking and reviewing some books. And I am so excited to get into February's reading month and talking to you all about what I'm currently reading, because I'm very excited about it. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you are all doing really well, and I'll see you all again very soon for my next video. Stay cozy, my friends. Bye!